Good evening. I'm going to introduce Jim Townsend tonight. And he's a veteran of both World War II and the Korean War, going from private to a major during those conflicts. During the late 50s and early 60s, he was president of United Far East Corporation, a company engaged in making long-term loans to Japanese businesses. He served as chairman of the National Justice Foundation from 1970 to 1997 and has been chairman of the National Monetary Foundation from 1984 to present. He also served 12 years as vice chairman of the Anaheim Public Utility Board. Jim published a National Educator newspaper from 1969 to 1996 and served as chairman of a populist organization, Redeem Our Country, ROC, and has been a freelance writer and feature columnist for the Spotlight newspaper, which he did a real bang-up job on Long Beach Navy Base, Costco, and Adelanto, and other articles that he writes for. His wife, Lucille, and he have been married for 54 years and have 2 children, a boy and a girl. He also has healing magnets, too, for purifying water on your car, on your hot water heater, on yourself. And Jim will explain the potential dangers caused by computer software and hardware that can't cope with the change of the millennium, and also present some of the real solutions that he has found through his investigation. Jim Townsend.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I hope by the time I'm through that I will have passed on some information that will be of maybe of vital concern later on. I'd tell you the joke, but the truth is I am the joke because I've never been able to tell them. And my wife always warns me before I go, when you get up, don't try to tell any jokes. So I'll pass. You mentioned Anthony Hilder. I've known him for about 30 years, and he hasn't changed one bit in the whole time I've known him. He's a guy that goes and goes like that commercial with a rabbit on beating a drum. For the last 2 years, I've been involved in the PR work with a firm over in Irvine called Veronix Technology, and they are deeply involved in this problem of the y2k, the year 2000 problem, or the millennium bug, whatever you want to call it. But it is a problem. It may turn out to be the greatest disaster man-made that this world has ever known. At least that's the way it's being played around the world. As things stand right now, the people who are in business, and these are the big ones, the ones that have the mainframe computers, not the little PCs or the desktops they call them. They're not concerned with that, and besides that, most of the PCs now that are being manufactured are the year 2000 compliant. And they won't have any trouble with that. However, if you go to buy a new computer, it wouldn't hurt to ask them if it's compliant for the year 2000. This problem started many, many years ago, maybe 40, 45 years ago, back in the early stages of the computers. In those days, hard disk, which is the memory part of the computer, was very large and very small on what you could put on it that would stay in the way of memory. So engineers made a conscious decision to try to save a little space and a little money by taking the year, instead of 4 digits, and using 2. For example, say in that time around 1962 or 3, instead of saying 1962, they just said 62, and each year after became just the 2 digits. Now they've known over 40 years that they had this problem. And they knew that unless it was corrected, it was going to run into a lot of problems. But the computer business exploded so fast, and the technological advancements came so fast, and people were making so much money in the business that they didn't give a lot of consideration to the problem that was hanging back there just like a hurricane off your coast. They talked about it once in a while, but not much was done. In the meantime, with the technological advancements, things changed. In the early days, the programs were codes called COBOL and Fortran, and these were very difficult codes to learn and to work in the computer business. So as it grew, new programs were developed, new codes. In fact, thousands of new programs and hundreds of thousands of code lines, and not hundreds of millions of code lines. The programmers of today don't know anything at all about the old codes that most of the mainframe computers have that run their computers today. In the early days, IBM became the #1 computer manufacturer in the world as far as the mainframe computers were concerned. Many of these computers had the chip that ran the computer embedded into the hardware. IBM owned the hardware, they licensed it out, and as time went by, the old computer chip stayed in the mainframe, and new programs were built around from the mainframe into the various programs as they came along. As each succeeding generation came by, more and more of the newcomers in the programming knew little or nothing about the past. None of them knew COBOL or Fortran or the others, and many of them didn't know the ones that came along in the later days. So, as time went by, they were so busy and making so much money that they didn't bother with it. But about 4 or 5 years ago, Social Security set out to try to fix their computer. And they've been working on it ever since. The IRS spent $4 billion trying to do the same thing, and they just gave up. They just threw up their hands. Well, don't worry. You're not going to get away with it. Although I'm on your side all the way. And just to deviate a minute, for your information, I'm one of the 3 people in the whole United States who debated on public radio the PR man for the Federal Reserve. And the IRS has had me on their S list for a long time. I wish it would. If there's anything in the world, if I had one wish, I'd like to see all those people sink in the ocean, yelling, "You owe me $5,000 or $5 million." Anyway, they would be floating to the top of the fish. In finishing up this thing of giving you the background on what has happened, as it came along and it got into into present day time, more and more of the business, the government agencies, and banks and insurance companies and things like that suddenly awoke to the fact that they had a major problem, that they had millions of lines of codes and they didn't have enough programmers to fix it. In fact, they tell me that of the some 750 companies who are working in fixing the y2k problem, that if all of them were to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, And if they were correct in what they were doing, they couldn't fix more than half of the computers in the country, and these are mainframes. Some of the problems that these people run into is that programmers were notoriously lazy. And when they wrote a program and it didn't exactly fit, they made little adjustments to it, but they didn't justify it, and it didn't go into the write-up on the program. Too high? It didn't go into the program. In other words, when the present day programmers trying to fix this problem run into these shortcut programs, the question being asked is how are they going to fix the code when all of it's not there for them to even begin to try. But the worst thing is, with all of the people that are working on fixing the computers, and if we give them credit for being successful and we say they're going to fix them all, the problem is they're working in the wrong direction. All of these companies that's paying millions and millions of dollars in government agencies and etc. are all working on a line of code solution instead of working on a total solution, a system solution. And there's going to be a lot of sick people when they wake up on New Year's or even sooner, probably in next year, and find out that all the money they expended, that the line of codes didn't fix the problem. It didn't fix the system. And so far, there's many of these old-time computer programmers that worked in COBOL and know what the score is, they're trying to tell them that it's not working. All the work you're doing is in vain, and you're going to waste a lot of money. And the one people that know that is lawyers. And I want to just give you a little shot here of the lawyers. If I can find it. This came out of the newspaper. This came out of USA Today, and the headline reads, Lawyers Circling Over 2,000 Time Bombs. Now get this. These people really think ahead, and the lawyers' companies have been organized, and they are bringing other lawyers in, and they are training them on how to go about suing all these big companies after the computers crash in the year 2000. They say, and it even says here in the article, the cost to the companies that don't have their computers working in the year 2000 is going to be a lot more cost than what it's costing to repair them. They're assuming that some of these people that are working in the business are going to be able to repair them. And Lord knows, I want to tell you from what I know, I sure hope they do. I sure hope they are able to repair them. Over the last couple of years, there's been a lot of information that's been put out by and in major newspapers, such as the business group called for legislation. Well, here a short time ago, they appointed Senator Robert Bennett as head of the Senate investigation on computers. They generously appropriated $20 million for his committee to get to the bottom of this thing and work out and start getting some of these computers compared, some of them fixed. And I just read in the paper today that they said they should have appropriated $600 million if they wanted to make a dent in the problem that the government has. The state legislatures have done little or nothing about it. In fact, if you try to talk to them, they won't even return your phone call. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about right now is not something that I dreamed up. It's research that was done by people who are writers in the business and know computers. They know how they work. And they research these problems. And what they put out belies the fact that many people are saying, oh, this is baloney and all this is it's not going to happen. Don't pay any attention to it. Well, if it doesn't happen, I would be absolutely delighted to be one of them that was fooled. Because if what happens, if the thing they claim really does happen, I want to give you a little scenario of what you might face. You get up on January 1st and you turn the light on and it don't go on. You go over to the water, to the hydrant or the faucet to get a drink of water and the water don't come out. You notice there isn't a lot of noise from the traffic going by. And finally you decide you'll walk down to the coffee shop and get a paper and a hot cup of coffee since you can't make it. Your coffee maker didn't work. But when you get down there isn't any newspaper and the coffee shop isn't open, and you go on down the street about another block to the supermarket and it's all boarded up, it's not open. And about that time you decide you're not going to have a very good day. Now think about it, and this is the real worry. All of government, all of business, even down to the small businessman, has sold his businesses to computers. They run everything. And if those computers don't work, nothing runs. Give you a little example. Union Pacific owns 12 or 15,000 railroad cars that they run in and out every day in various parts of the country. In the old days, I'm sure all of you remember the old brakeman out with his lantern and the train backing up and going forward as the brakeman pulled the lever that pulled the tracks over so they could go down the side and drop off their cars to the businesses that they were servicing. Well, they got rid of all those and they turned all of that problem over to computers. There's no people working for the railroad today that were experienced in the old ways of operation. So if the Union Pacific can't get their cars fixed or can't get their computers fixed, the trains aren't going to run. And the trains are the second largest cargo carriers in the United States, only exceeded by the shipping industry. So what's going to happen? The stuff that's carried on the trains is not going to make it into the depot. The stuff that's carried on the trucks also are programmed for delivery by computers. The computers tell the drivers and the loaders what goes in the truck and where it goes, what's the destination, whether it's going to Garden Grove, Anaheim, or San Francisco or New York. If those trains don't run right then and there, there's an awful big part of our food supply that will not be able to reach the grocery stores if the grocery stores were open. But again, you're going to have the same thing with the trucks. So what's going to happen to people? Their lights don't work, their water doesn't come on, no power. And then they find out in 2 or 3 days that they're running out of groceries. Stuff in the refrigerator that's in the freezer will have thawed out by that time. it's a mess. And inside, in my estimation, this is just my estimation, nobody else's, I predict that there'll be anarchy within 15 days, because when the food supply runs out, when you're having trouble getting water, or you can't get water at all unless you steal some from somebody who has planned ahead, they're not going to take it. The people are not going to stand still and put up with this thing. That can happen. I'm saying it can happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen. But there is no question at all that something's going to happen, and it is going to impact our lives. And I doubt if they'll ever be the same again after the year 2000, unless there is some common sense people that get together and listen to what these programmers who know the score tells them what to do. And if they were to work as a team, and the whole country work as a team, perhaps we could solve the problem with these computers and get them done. I'm doing PR work for a firm and have been for 2 years that has the only automated repair system in the country. We can't even get on a talk show. The reason is because the people who are selling the gold and the silver and the coins have bought up the time, and they don't want to hear about any solution that's going to save these problems right now, because they're making too much money. You all know who Gary North is, I assume. He put out a magazine that was one of the most frightening things I ever read in my life. And since then, others have added to it. But if you listen to the radio, if you hear George Putnam, if you hear Ray Bream or Joe Battaglia or Michael Reagan, you'll hear now 2000, the millennium bug, and on and on and on. All of it is doom and gloom, just like the speech I just got through giving. It's doom and gloom. Not one place do we hear anybody on the air, in the newspapers, on television, telling us there's any hope. I'm not a computer programmer. I have a computer, but I have a hell of a hard time even working the little end of the deal. And I do. I work my own computer. So this thing has got to have people get serious. The public has got to start putting pressure on the government and on business and letting them know that we're not going to stand still for this thing. If we don't do this, and we just sit back and say, oh, it ain't going to happen, like somebody just told me tonight, I don't believe it's a bunch of bull. And it isn't a bunch of bull, unfortunately. I heard on the radio, I think it was Art Bell one night, in a news broadcast, in which it said, the government has already planned to station troops in 170 of the country's largest cities. Now, if that doesn't sound like martial law to me, I don't know what does. And if they're going to station troops there, why are they going to station troops here? A thing that should be done right now, every city in the country should be making contingency plans of what they're going to do to supply the water and supply the food in the event that the power companies haven't solved the problem and the water companies haven't been able, have been able to work out a way so that we get water and power. They keep telling me, don't worry about it, they're going to be there. Now, I interviewed the PR, two of the PR men in Edison, and everything was going along real well. They were answering all my questions, and I was calling them to interview them for an article for a magazine. And so they were very nice to me and just getting along fine, and one of them was going to fax me right away. He's going to go down the hall, and as soon as we quit talking, and he would fax me information that I was asking for. So They assured me, Mr. Townsend, don't worry, don't worry. I can assure you, you will have power on the year 2000. We are working on this thing, and it's almost completed. Our timetable is right on schedule. And don't worry about hitting that light switch on the year 2000 because your lights will go on. And I said, well, I'm really pleased to hear that you're doing so well on that, fixing that computer. I said, I assume that you're working on lines of code. And they said, that's right. And we're doing real well. We got a good team in here, and it's going well. And I said, well, I'd like to ask you a question. You get your computers work. Everything is working real good. And I said, you network with other companies, don't you? They said, yes, we do. Or the man did. I said, what happens when when the people you're networking with, and your computer sends information to their computer, and their computer isn't fixed? And there was a long pause, and he said, that's a good question. And they hung up. That was the end of the interview without anything at all. The guy never got down the hall. He never faxed me anything. I called again the next day and left word and said, I did not receive the information you promised me. Would you kindly phone me? No calls. Nobody will take my call at Edison. That's because the experts tell me if you fix your mainframe computer and you try to communicate with another mainframe computer that has not been fixed, the one that isn't fixed will crash the one that is fixed. So, you see, we got problems. We've got to make arrangements, and we've got to get the state, the counties, the cities, all making plans on what the heck they're going to be able to do to keep us from going into a panic, to see that we get food, to see that we get water, and some of the necessities that we must have to survive. Otherwise, you're going to have people running in every direction, and when they start getting thirsty and they can't get any water, they're going to get it anywhere they can, and whatever way it takes to get it. Now, I'm already saving water. I've already got about 25,000 gallons of water in jugs. I'm buying rain barrels, and I'm going to have at least 4 of those full to the brim of water. I have some survival food, probably not enough, but I got some. And I'm going to buy as much canned goods and staples such as pinto beans and things like that so that I will have something to eat. You want to store those things. You want to store water that you can use in the toilets. You want to store toilet paper. You want to store water. And you want to store food. And any of the other little things like flashlight batteries, flashlights, propane, gas if you've got a propane stove, all those things will be of great benefit to you. You also might want to get a couple of shotguns and a couple of boxes of shells, because if you got the water and them ain't, they're going to come over and see about taking some of yours. And if a man figures he's going to die anyway, he's going to be awful brave in what he's doing. Many a dictator met his Waterloo when he almost starved the people to death, and they came after him with sticks and rocks and anything they could find, because they'd just as soon be shot as to go ahead and starve to death. And that's the situation this country can be in. This is my scenario. It isn't somebody else's. But I want to read now some of the things that I was just talking about that you might want to take note of. I'll read you one more here. This came from it appeared in Newsweek, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times of London, and England's prestigious Economics. economists. But these are not the news sources the vast majority of average Americans depend on. It is when this story finally becomes a staple on ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, etc., and believe me, it will, and soon, and the invariable public panic will strike full force. These are in major newspapers, and they haven't been hit yet by radio and TV as heavy as they're going to be. By the way, the company that I'm doing PR for, and ex-Congressman Dannemar, I brought him into the deal because he no longer is in Congress, but he was there 18 years. And so he took the president of the company that I'm talking about, the chairman of the board, and the chief operating officer to Washington, D.C., and they went in to see Senator Bennett, who's in charge of the subcommittee on the year 2000, and who has a $20 million fund to work with on trying to solve this problem. And after the company had made its presentation, and the chairman said, well, what do you want from me? And he said, well, the chairman said, well, we'd like you to give us some entree to some of these agencies, because with the automated software that we have, while the average company is out there working on 100 lines, we're doing thousands of lines in half the time. And Bennett said, well, I don't know what I can do. He says, I can't legislate. And the chairman told me later, he said, I was so damn mad I felt like saying, well, what, you SOB, what are you doing here? What are you people doing here if you can't legislate? In fact, he told me that at lunch 2 days ago. He's still burning. And they're not going to do anything. The city's not going to do anything, the county or the state, unless the pressure is brought to bear, and people like us has got to get on these city council supervisors and the legislators at the state and start making them do something. Otherwise, you're going to see panic, and you're going to see people dying by the hundreds and thousands. And there's no way to get around it, because all this information that's coming out is not a bunch of hokum. Somebody said to me, did you ever hear of the year 2000? Did you ever hear of the what is it? What? No, that's not it. There was a program came out about 10 years ago, and I can't think of the name, but it was 2000. It was so bad that even Alan Cranston, who was still in the Senate at that time, he turned it down. This group of elitists wanted to get rid of 3/4 of the people in the world because there's too many people and it was crowding them. And Global 2000, that was what it was, Global 2000. And so somebody said, well, you say that this isn't possible, that all these people are giving you this baloney? Did you ever hear of the Global 2000? What better way to get rid of 3/4 of the people in the country than something like this? Well, I can't answer that. It's just one more frightening block that's been on top of all the other doom and gloom blocks. You know that Gary Norris said that there would be a run on the banks, like it'd be the mother run of all times on banks, because when people got the word that the bank's liable to crash, that they would be down there trying to get their money out. And the Federal Reserve is so worried about that they're trying to assure the people that we've got plenty of money and we can meet any contingency. In other words, they're supposed to have printed up all kinds of Federal Reserve notes and will be able to deliver them to the banks as fast as they need them. And there's already a certain amount of people that are drawing their money out of the banks. One of the top dogs in UPS, who has been a big investor and who is a multi-millionaire, cashed in all of his stock, bonds, and everything else and bought gold and silver. There's one guy that sure does believe there's a problem, and he didn't trust the banks. UPS, by the way, we've done everything we can to talk to them, and they won't talk to us because they have a computer division of their own, and the programmers don't want to tell the big shots they don't know how to solve the problem. And when the big shots call the computer division, they tell them, don't worry, we're working on this. Don't worry, we're going to have it fixed. And my son happens to work for UPS and was able to open some of the doors. And I had lunch with one of the top, not real top dogs, I shouldn't say that, but I had lunch with one of the high officers in UPS. And he said the very thing that I just told you. The computer programmers are scared to death that if they let it be known that they can't fix this problem, they're all going to be fired. These are some of the things we're talking about. Your local bank is controlled by powerful mainframe computers. They've got to be fixed or they'll crash. Your local city water supply system is controlled by powerful mainframe computers. Your local regional electric power grid is controlled by a powerful mainframe computer. Your local gas supply is controlled by a powerful mainframe computer. Your favorite commercial airlines is controlled by a high-powered mainframe computer. And I could go on with that, but I don't think there would be any reason to keep hitting it. In February 1997, Federal Reserve Chairman Alan Greenspan quietly admitted that the nation's banks absolutely must be 100% compliant. He stated that even 99% compliant would not do. Congressman James Leach, chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Financial Service, followed up by saying, it takes little imagination to picture the ricochet effect the malfunctioning computer system would have on important bank operations. All right, what can you do to protect yourself? The fact is, no one knows exactly what will happen. That's why you should make reasonable preparations for what can happen and not just prepare for what you hope, perhaps too optimistically, will happen, mainly that it will be, that the thing will be repaired. This is one very interesting. The states quietly are passing legislation giving themselves full legal immunity from the lawsuits due to year 2000 related problems. The Social Security Administration now admits it's absolutely no contingency plan for a y2k failure. And one of the calls I made to the Social Security Administration, they said they were pretty sure they were going to have 98% of it done by the year 2000. And I forget how many million of people they got, 35 million people or something they send checks to. And if you take 2% of 35 million, just think of how many calls they're going to get. Huh?
Assuming the phones are working. They may not get calls.
They may not answer them even if they are working. Reuters News Service recently reported that 5 to 10% of the world bank payment systems do not work on January 1st, 2000. It will create a global liquidity lockup. Translation: the entire world banking system will collapse if even a tiny fraction of the banking payment system fails. I keep running into these little deals and I'm looking for something else. I thought I had it in a nice, neat 1, 2, 3 ABC order. And I did, and then I mixed it up. Well, I think I've pretty much covered what I'm trying to find here and taken too long to find it. So I read the thing, and it said some of the things that I mentioned to you that you should do to protect yourself and not to wait till the last minute, because even by September of 1999, there will probably be runs on the grocery stores of people starting to stack up and maybe even stock up even before it gets down to the last nitty gritty. And of course, the sad thing is that not everybody is going to have the money to go out and to stock up on the food supplies and the other things they need because they don't have the income to do it. Pinto beans is considered one of the world's superfoods, and they're relatively cheap. And they go a long ways, and they taste dang good. And you can make chili beans out of them and a whole lot of other things. Nothing like a good pot of pinto beans with a ham bone in it and a plate of cornbread. Get your pinto beans. They're dry. They're in a sack. You can get 50-pound bags of them. And just set them on the side. Just set them around somewhere. And then if you have to go to it, you'll be able to eat. You'll survive very well on pinto beans. I know, I ate them every day in the Depression. And they tasted good. I was never sad when I was coming home from school and I could smell them pinto beans cooking a half a block away. And I said, boy, pinto beans again. I said that every damn day for 2 years. My mother tried to pass off, what's this gourd deal? What do they call that? Huh? No, it looks like it's a big yellow pumpkin-like deal, long, squash. What? Squash and something else. So she tried slicing that thing and dipping it in cornmeal and frying it and try to pass it off as fish. It didn't work. Elderly people born before the year 1900 already having their insurance policy canceled. In Kansas, a 104-year-old woman was recently sent a computer-generated notice from the Education Board notifying her to enter kindergarten. These computers are already having some problems, and they're going to have more. And another thing you want to keep in mind is as the year 2000 grows closer, there's going to be all kinds of people with all kinds of ideas, but the ones that are going to be the worst are the ones that always see the bottom of the glass in every situation. No matter what it is, there's never any hope at all. And I think that we've learned enough in our tenure on earth that we're too smart to sit around and just wait for this thing to happen. If you knew your neighbor was going to come over and burn your house down, if you didn't have a shotgun, maybe at least you'd have your garden hose running. So you can do something. Everybody can do something. And the time to start thinking about it and making out your list of what you want to do, and if you don't have the income to go out and get all you want at one time, I know I certainly don't, start doing a little bit at a time. I've got a pantry that I've got green beans and peas and things in cans, and I mark it with a marker on when I brought it in. And I got to going through this pantry the other day, and I found green beans that had been sitting in there and peas for over 3 years. So I just went in there and cracked open one of them suckers and put it in the pan, and it was just as good as the day I put it in there. So the point in telling you that is, if you get those things now, they'll probably be just as good by the time you need them, if you ever do. And you won't lose anything in the long run if you don't need them. So I think I will conclude some of this thing up by saying, yes, the year 2000 is a problem. It's a big problem. And it's one that we've got to face up to and prepare for. And that's what you can do. And if you do that and put the pressure on the people that we pay to represent us to start preparing, maybe it won't be too bad for everybody. If they've made enough plans and they have spent the money that needs to be spent, they can at least have supplies on hand in every city in the country, I would think, for a few weeks anyway. If we can send billions of millions of tons of food to foreign countries and give it away, it would seem to me that when our people are faced with starvation, that they ought to move some of that food down to every place where we live today. So that's as far as I can go on the thing without making it sound like it was really a bad problem. Sure.
Okay, I'm a believer. I'm a follower of Gary North.
You what?
I said I am a believer. I'm a follower of Gary North. I have a 2-hour tape by him. Now, when I talk to people about this, one of the things they bring up is, what good will gold and silver do you?
Well, I'm going to use a little bit of history here. Back in 1923, when Germany went bankrupt and the marks blew through the streets and nobody would even bend over to pick them up, and to go down and buy a loaf of bread took a wheelbarrow full of marks, the people went out and they went after food. They went out to the country and they started trading everything they had. And one of the famous quotes that came out of that era was a farmer telling a man that was trying to give him a very, very expensive painting for a 1 week's supply of food. And he says, I don't want no more pictures, I don't want no more, I want gold and silver. Barter, that's what gold and silver will do for you. There's always some people that will have more than they need and will have stocked up for the very thing we're talking about, of people wanting, not being prepared and wanting to buy food. And they are looking forward to making a lot of money out of it. And that's gold and silver. I believe Gary North believes every word he's saying. I'm not meaning to denigrate him in any way. He's a great writer, and I've followed him for a long time. Next question.
In June of this year, there was held a meeting in Washington, D.C., where I believe it was risk management. The government had a meeting. It was led by Senator Bennett of Utah.
Yeah.
Have you seen, I mean, I don't know if you saw the program or if you have seen
No, but that's the Bennett I was talking about.
Okay. One of the speakers got up and said that when the American public becomes sufficiently aware of the y2k problem, that the government anticipates that there will be a run on the banks, as you indicated. When the run on the banks happens, which they anticipate to happen late summer, early fall next year, have you learned of the government's solution? Besides, are they just going to push money out the doors of the banks? And
That's what they're telling us. That's what Alan Greenspan is saying in the Federal Reserve, and they're guaranteeing the public that they will have enough. If you go down and you want your money out, they'll have the currency there they claim.
Right. Well, I heard that they've got 250 billion
printed up
and waiting, ready to go for this thing.
I've heard that.
Okay. Well, my question is knowing what happens when you have a half a glass of milk and you start pouring water into that half a glass of milk, for a while it still looks like milk, but it soon doesn't taste like milk?
No.
Have you heard anything, and the reason I'm asking is from the government's point of view, anything further on what they're going to do to support the cash that they're putting out for the public?
That's a very interesting question, because I was thinking about that very same thing today, because I was told that where at one time we had to have a reserve in gold, and we had to have 25% of gold on hand at all time, we have nothing backing it up today, and I'm told they've been running these printing presses wild and stacking up tons of currency for some unknown contingency, which could well be what you said.
But you haven't heard whether or not they're going to support it somehow to keep that from watering down what they've got going. In other words, I anticipate widespread hyperinflation.
Yeah, that's if they have this currency and they're figuring on doing it, it will water down and it will inflate like hell, and there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing. And they can destroy the whole monetary system inside of 3 months if they are really if they're really going to just feed paper into it, because as the supplies come down, the supplies on hand, everything's going to come up on the cost. Yes, sir.
I hope these truckloads of cash that the Treasury has got all printed up aren't going to be delivered by diesel trucks that have no diesel fuel, that are routed by computers that are down because of the y2k problem. Regarding gold and silver, I'm all for gold and silver, although I've often thought it'd be a little impractical to take a Krugerrand or a Maple Leaf to go down and buy a quart of milk, a loaf of bread.
Mm-hmm.
I would think the pre-64 so-called junk silver coins like dimes and quarters would be much more practical, negotiable. If you hand a guy a Krugerrand for a loaf of bread or even a cart of groceries, what's he going to give you for change?
That's why I've got a little junk silver, and it's dimes and quarters. And it's for the very reason you mentioned. I don't want to, well, first of all, I didn't have to worry about the Krugerrand because I don't have any. And I couldn't afford them so I don't have to worry about that end of the deal. And more people are like me than are the ones with the Krugerrands, I know that.
Regarding having guns and weaponry to protect your stash, I think that's a very real problem. The thing I ponder over is, even if you have 5,000 rounds of ammunition and you got 10,000 guys trying to evade you, you got a problem. I would think somebody said it's best to form communities of people of like mind.
I agree.
Where there's strength in numbers, and retire to a more or less remote area, and to get out at least 2 gas tanks worth of distance from the nearest big city. Because when all the hordes come after you, they're going to drive their cars until they run out of gas. And then there's going to be no gas to take them any further. So,
and
I
some of
if
them
you're 2 or
won't
3
start.
tanks away, you're probably in good shape.
Some of the cars won't start because they got a computer in them. And if it's got if it's got a date on in that computer for any reason at all, the car won't start.
Well, now, lastly, what about cooperative buying arrangements? Now, Peter, I think I saw, yeah, there he's standing right behind me there, guy in the blue shirt and the VW monogram. I believe, Peter, you went up to San Bernardino somewhere, and you were checking into bulk buys of like your pinto beans or whatever kind of beans there are. I would think that if a group of people got together and maybe did a cooperative buy, you'd have a little more pricing leverage, and maybe you could work out a more
I'm sure you
advantageous
could.
buy.
I know cooperatives have worked very, very well. I've heard about them and talked to people that's been in them for years. I've never been in one myself, but I know that bulk buying, that you can buy at a lot better price. I sell magnets, and I buy them, a lot of them at one time, and I make a profit on what I sell. But if you went to the same company where I buy them and you bought whatever you bought from me from them, you'd pay about the same price that I sell them for. Only by buying in bulk am I able to have a profit in the thing for reselling it.
I think I'll, maybe Peter, when he comes up here, can shed a little light on some typical prices, like for 50 or 100 pound sacks of beans or barrels or whatever, and also how to store them to keep them from spoiled and from keeping the rats.
Well, if you got the money, you can also buy one of these generators, and if you can store up a little gas, you can keep that running, keep your lights on. Yes, sir.
My question was on the computer chips and the cars. So if those are going to stop running, would it be preferable to have a diesel engine vehicle?
Well, you got me on it. I think the way that they're working right now with this smog check 2, that they're going to try to get all the diesels off the road by that time.
I was just thinking it might be better since the military runs on diesel and so does commerce across the nation, that there might be a better supply of diesel than
Well,
gasoline.
I doubt if a diesel has a chip in it to begin with. I don't think it does. But I'm not smart enough to know that. Huh?
Some of the what they call the electronic caterpillar engines have chip-controlled, computer-controlled engines on the latest model.
Well, it may very well have a dang computer in it.
Well, I'm in the automotive business, and I've seen a lot of ships out in a cow pasture, but not in the automobile yet that are date compliant, that rely on a date. What they do, they count certain things, they count mileage, they do everything else, but none of them are date reliant.
I was only repeating what I read in one of these articles, that some cars would not start in the year 2000. Now, I don't know what Cadillacs and Mercedes-Benz and things have in them in the way of a computer chip. May very well. They said if you got a clock in your car, that and a date and a clock in your car, then that computer is going to go down. I know I have a clock in my car.
Well, most of the time the clocks, they just count the time and not the dates.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's just, but, you know, when it comes to relying on the government, I think you may as well forget about it. If you think looking for hope from the government, forget about it. I was born and raised during World War II, and when it comes to survival, we talk about an entirely different ball game here. What will happen is you know, the best way to compare it is like you take a ship and you set off to sail up into the sunset, and whatever you have on board, that is what you can rely on. And what you don't have, you're not going to get. Now, after World War II, when everything broke down, government, police, everything else, it was, I mean, dog eats dog, basically. There were not even pets around anymore. They were eaten. And, you know, you cannot go and rely on a government, or you try to manipulate it. All these things are, I don't believe they come into play here. What you have to do, everybody's pretty much on his own, and then they ought to do and do the best they can with what they have. Start out, get some water, get food. Now, I tried, I'm not a cook, okay? So, and I'm not of Italian descent, as you can tell, but I tried some spaghetti. And I bought some spaghetti a month ago, and I got some real good, I mean, original recipe, home cooking spaghetti sauce to go with it. I mean, I couldn't fail, right? Well, but my stomach didn't agree. So I know for food I will not store that kind of spaghetti sauce. I would say people ought to get food that they can try to eat, that they eat, can eat, and they should try to eat it. And because they will find out that what they think that they have is not what they're going to get or what they like it. Now you talk about surviving and eating beans. We had to survive for 6 months on nothing else but sugar beets. And I want to tell you, in the morning we got them fried, at noon we got them cooked, and in the evening we got them baked. And after a while we looked like sugar beets almost, you know. So I mean, you are on your own when that happens. And the worst thing is a big city. In a big city, you don't grow any fruits, you don't grow any vegetables on an asphalt patch. You gotta have a garden. You gotta have some room, something. So what are you gonna do? Unless you don't have that available, the people that were off the worst were the ones in a big city. Now the ones in the suburbs, they were much better off. They could have parked a little bit. They had gardens. It worked a little bit. They learned how to preserve food. They traded. But we're not in that position here.
That's right.
You go here in a big city and you try to grow a garden here. People don't even have a backyard anymore. They got a big house, but no backyards. Now, do you want to store gasoline? You're going to store propane for stoves? Where? In your room and blow it up? Unless you can have it well ventilated on the outside somewheres. I had somebody coming over and says, look, I want to buy a generator. I said, fine. What do you want? Well, a generator. What do you have? I said, I don't have any, but I can help you and I can advise you. Well, let's go. Let's see what you have. I said, okay, how much money do you have and what do you want to do with it? Well, it was very peculiar. What came in the end result, there were two young couples. They had some children. They lived in an apartment. They wanted to buy a generator. They did not even have a garage. They had no backyard. Now you're going to store gasoline in your living room, in your bedroom? That doesn't make sense, you know. So then the next thing, I said, well, how much money you have? How much can you spend? Well, maybe $500. I said, $500 doesn't get you anywhere. For $500, go, when you get your paycheck, go a couple bottles of water and stock them in your bedroom, in a closet, or somewhere there, and then get some food. That's about the best you can do with it. You are not going to get power for that kind of money. You're not prepared for it, and you're not in a position to really face it. So at the very end, it came down to that they have one child that was ill, that had asthma, and they had an asthma machine that used about 100 watts to run. So what can you do with it? You can go and you can buy, let's say, a deep cycle battery. You hook up an inverter with it, and then you get maybe some solar cells. Well, a solar panel is $500.
What's your question?
Uh, it's not all that simple. That's basic.
I
No
know.
questions.
I've been there, done
Yeah.
that. I went through that depression. I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
Short and sweet. I've done some work on y2k. It's actually going to start in April, not in 2000.
Yeah, that's right.
Pardon me?
I said that's right. April. When they think the first big crashes might start next year.
As far as computers are concerned. The other date to look for is September. Most computers have got the code for crash on their system called 999, which under the new system, that present system they've got, will crash most computers. I've talked to PG&E and a bunch of other power grid companies. Many of the power grid companies are still on manual override. They're still not fully automatic. Many of the train yards as well are still being run in some cases in the Midwest. I don't know about out here, but in the Midwest they're still running manual overrides.
They've got an override, you say?
They have manual overrides.
Yeah, well, I got news for you. They tested some of those overrides that we heard about, and everybody was starting to smile. Maybe it's not going to happen. Well, they weren't compliant at all, and when they were tested, they crashed.
They've tested some of the switches at PG&E and they work. They've tested the switches at PG&E on override, manual override, and they work. As far as
well, what kind of computers are they? Mainframe computers?
They bypass the computers and go straight main. It's a straight manual override. There are no computers involved in it.
Boy, if you got that, you got the silver bullet.
I've talked to the engineers at PG&E, Anyway, the second point is that the DoD has done some work on the missile systems that they presently have. They've got a 50% failure rate on the missile systems, both land-based and sea-based. That was from an engineer at Rockwell who did design the work. That's it.
Thank you.
I understand a little bit about computers, and I understand the Y2K problem. I think you and other people like you that are trying to get this message out, what I don't understand is why is everything date sensitive? You can tell a computer to do a lot of things, and the computer don't care what day it is, and it don't care what color the floor is. Why is everything so date sensitive? Nobody ever tells me that.
Well, I can tell you that, if you want to listen.
Yeah.
The computers that they're working off of, these old IBM mainframe computers, have been there for 40 years. And the way they were set up to handle 2 digits, and that's all. And the new computers are compliant. You can do that with new computers, no problem, but the old ones just won't do it. You can't tell.
It depends, sir, on what you tell it to do.
Well, then why don't you tell
the way I see it,
all these experts out here that are scared to death, and programmers who've made their living and are making it for 40 years. I mean, you're right and they're wrong?
No, but you haven't answered my question. You have not answered my question. There are some things that are not date sensitive. Is everything a computer does have to know the date, and if it's the wrong date, it don't work?
How do you go from 88 to 89 to 99 to 2000? That is a date. The year is in all these computers. The year.
I can take a computer and I can tell it to add 2 plus 2, and it will do it. Well, all right, that's an oversimplification. But it's not date sensitive, and everything you tell a computer to do is not date sensitive.
I don't believe you heard what I said. I'm talking about old mainframe computers.
Yeah, and you're telling me?
And you cannot tell a computer to do any damn thing you want it to. It's just not possible. You can't make those computers go 2000 when they got an embedded chip that can only go 2 digits. It can't go 4.
Okay,
now, how are you going to do that?
All right, that I understand.
Well, then what are we talking about?
We're talking about when I tell it to add 2 plus 2, and it won't do it because it thinks it's 1900 instead of 2000.
The computer don't have to do 2 plus 2 because it won't be running. That's what I'm trying to convey to you.
Well, you haven't done it, sir, because I do not see why it's date sensitive.
Here's all these dummies up here.
You tell me all about
that
all
I'm
these
talking about,
experts.
and I got one guy that knows the answer, and
I don't have the answer, but I'm still looking for it. I want to know why everything is date sensitive, and nobody is able to tell me that.
Why don't you tell me too while you're Okay. I'm a computer programmer, and I did give out my resumes to some of these agencies or whatever that were looking for people to fix a Y2K problem. Problem is, they're looking for COBOL programmers with at least 5 years experience. I have 0 years of experience in COBOL. But yet, if I see a COBOL program, I can understand it. If I can do a search on date, I mean, I don't know what the big problem is, except for, of course, you did say something about the computer chip. Why not get new computer chips?
Well, let me tell you, you just be patient a little longer, and believe me, they'll not only come for you, they'll not only answer your calls, they'll send a limousine over to get you. That's how computer programmers that know COBOL right now can draw $250,000 a year.
Right now, I mean, I don't have COBOL experience, so.
Well, that's what they're saying. Banks, I imagine I imagine any of these major companies, if you let them know and you know COBOL, I bet you can get a write your own salary.
How about, let me ask you, what demand is there for Fortran programmers? Because I have 5 years of Fortran, but yet I'm not getting any calls for Fortran programming to fix these problems. Is it because of the companies that, like defense industries, McDonnell Douglas, or what used to be Boeing and so forth, that still have Fortran programs? Is it because they have enough programmers to do that?
There's a lot of the old computers that have programs that was in Fortran.
Pardon?
There's a lot of the old computers that needs to be fixed.
Well, why aren't they calling me to fix Fortran programs? I have 5 years experience,
Well,
and I have my resumes in some of these
I think
places.
the agency you're using doesn't know who to contact. You ought to be able to have a job like that.
I mean, I do have a job, but it has nothing to do with the Y2K.
Well, I mean in what you're talking about
Yeah.
as a programmer. I had a head of one of these agencies that said last year, if I could lay my hands on 600 programmers, I could give every one of them a job in 1 week.
Yeah, but they're looking for a specific kind of programmer like COBOL.
Yes, that's unfortunately true.
Even though people like me can learn.
Well, that's a point also. It's one they're going to have to address sooner or later.
I understand a lot of these dates that are embedded in these old programs don't even look like dates. And it doesn't say like August 6, 1996 or something like that. And depending on who's doing the coding, who did the compiling, they're all different. And a lot of these old duffers have died off.
Right.
There's an excellent article, by the way, in the current Media Bypass magazine on this about it's a challenge put forth. There may be some of them in the back room there, back table. A challenge put forth by an old Fortran and COBOL programmer. He says, we're out here, we can fix it. But he said, we've been trying to tell the government for years that it needs to be fixed, and we were just laughed off. But he put forth a bill of particulars. He says, these are the conditions upon which we will fix the computers. One, you delete the 16th Amendment to the Constitution. You fire 3/4 of all government employees, just giving their termination notice with no pension benefits. And he went on and on like that. It's an excellent article in the current Media Bypass. So, and he said that is our rules of engagement.
Well, FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, has these old COBOL programs and embedded chips that cannot be fixed under any set of circumstances. And there's no time to buy a new computer system. They can be re-engineered, and that's the only way they can fix them.
At Bennett's hearing, they indicated that 95% of the banks around the country, their alarm systems are going to all go offline at once because of the embedded chip problem.
Right.
They cannot address in the alarm. They can't go out and buy these chips. There's not enough time.
And nobody knows exactly what programs they are or how to fix them. No, you're right.
Okay, sir.
Yes.
I have a question for you.
I hope I can answer it.
Let me preface it a little bit. We just the last few days we saw a little bit of economic problem in Asia and what that did to the stock market, although it recovered partly. Now, here's a scenario for you, and I'd like to tell me what might happen in such a situation. Suppose every single 100%, 101% of all computers were compliant in the United States of America and Canada and Western Europe and Japan. But the mainframe computers in some of the other countries in the world, like China and etc., were not. Russia, so on. Now that seems to me like a pretty realistic scenario.
We could not communicate with them.
Well, now considering what we just went through the last 2 or 3 days,
Yeah, they would all.
what would be the consequences of that?
I know what you're talking about, and it's a very good point, because if this could cause this kind of a stock market upheaval with the fact that they dropped 10-20% in Japan or Hong Kong or wherever, and it caused this kind of turmoil, what kind of turmoil would happen if all these countries that are not in the same position that he mentioned. It would be a disaster.
I know of a possible solution. If it's embedded in the hardware, you know, the two-digit dates, I've worked on systems where the program would compare the date and it say if it's before 50, it will add 20 to it. If it's after 50, then it will assume that it's 1900
Oh,
and
yeah,
something.
we've been all through that. That doesn't
But-
work.
Well, I mean, in cases for people's age, I mean, if they, of course, for things that have more than 100-year span, like my dad, I mean, if he were alive, he'd be 101 now. That wouldn't quite work with him, but it seems to me there would be some kind of way of saying some little flag or little counter that would count the centuries, you know, to get around that problem.
Well, you know, it
I mean,
seems
why
like to
wouldn't
me
it?
is one of the main expressions that you hear today when you talk about this. It seems to me there ought to be a way, and that's the thing I've been saying too for a long time. It seems to me, but that's not what the experts are saying. All these people who have grown up in the computer business, like the company I'm with, the president of the company became a millionaire back in 1976 when he sold a program to McDonnell Douglas. It was a new program, a new generation of programs. And he says these computers cannot be fixed. He's the one that developed the system that this company has that's automated, and he says there's no way that any of these computers are going to be fixed if they just work on the line of code. Hmm?
You're right. You cannot, line of code will, even if they can figure out the line of code, it will not solve the problem.
Yeah, it's got to be 100%.
The government finally came out and admitted to itself and now to the American public that it is a hardware problem. It is a chip problem.
Well, I called and interviewed, as I told you, I'm also a freelance writer, and this thing I'm doing on PR is a lot of fun, interesting. It don't pay much yet. But I interviewed a bunch of people who are in the business around the country, in like Arkansas and up in California and up in Washington and places like that, where I could find and get to the head of the company. And every one of them admitted to me that they had to be 100% perfect. Now, they thought they could fix a computer with a program, just a line of code. And every one of them, I found out in the first two interviews that I didn't argue with any of them about that was working on the line of code, because if you did, made them mad, they hang up on you. And besides, why should I argue with them? They knew more than I did. Yes, sir.
Can you explain to me how the binary code plays into all this?
What?
How the binary code plays into all this?
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Can you explain to me how the binary code plays into this?
Well, I don't have the answer. I don't know.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I think he's referring to zeros and ones, the binary code, which is the basic arithmetic in a computer. Regarding the comment on the, thank you, Jim, very much. On the, by the way, I hope, can you join us down at John's restaurant for a cup of coffee or a sandwich or something for a while? Okay. On the a lot of focus is on the mainframes. PC Magazine a couple of months ago, I believe it was, ran an extensive article because I have a War of 1812 PC. Actually, it was built in 1989. It's a 386SX, which is a pretty obsolescent machine now. And according to this article, it says it's the BIOS chip is one of the major causes of the problem. And he said there's no, I think mine has a Phoenix or a Ward BIOS chip in it, basic operating system. And that nobody makes a y2k compliant BIOS chip for a 386SX, nor is it likely that anybody will, because there's not enough time has moved on and there's not enough market there to make it to warrant redesigning a chip for that narrow market segment. So it means I've either got to replace the motherboard or else get a different computer. Now I have a Windows 95 machine, a new machine. Well, of course 98 is out now, but I have a compact. And there's a British author or there's a testing lab in Britain who said there's quite a bit of Microsoft software that will not work. And everybody's saying, well, Bill Gates can save us all from perdition. He'll come up with a silver bullet. Well, from everything I read, Bill Gates has a big problem solving the problems within his own organization. And he's made it quite plain, he has no time or assets or resources, even though he's got $36 billion in personal assets, to solve the Y2K problem. He's got his own, he's got problems at home. So I understand if you have a 486, some of them, the older ones won't work. Some of the newer ones, you may be able to get a BIOS chip for it. Most of the Pentiums, I believe, will work. But it's up in the air. There is an article, though, I believe it's in PC Magazine, that goes into great detail on this. Aaron, maybe you have something on that.
On what specifically? Say what you were saying earlier. I was kind of half paying attention. I'm sorry.
Well, you got the floor. I was just talking about the BIOS chip in these PC computers. Okay. It isn't just mainframes. Businesses today have become very dependent on networked PCs.
Network PCs, correct.
And the PCs are not without sin.
Right. Basically, what we're talking about here is, again, we're back to the embedded chip technology. What I recommend is that for people who don't understand what that is, to get an encyclopedia, look up on microchips. That's what I did when I made my tape. I'm not trying to promote my tape. When I made my tape, I did my homework with regards to how the PCs work, how they think, and how they act, and why they do what they do. Okay. And anyway, though, the problem is, again, with the embedded chip technology. The BIOS, if my understanding is correct, is the basic heart of the computer when you turn it on. Without the BIOS, it doesn't tell the command it doesn't acknowledge the keyboard, and it doesn't acknowledge most of your peripherals that exist out there within your system, personal PC system. The BIOS, again, is just a microchip. That's all it is. Itself, that's programmed to carry out its functions. And basically, it's an embedded chip that must be replaced. If it cannot be replaced, or there's no replacement, the motherboard's history. Because without the BIOS, you ain't going anywhere.
Yeah, anybody knows where to get a 386SX BIOS chip, I'd like to know it, because it works perfectly well. It's a 10-year-old computer. It's been well burned in. It's reliable, works every time. But I'm going to have to trash it or replace the motherboard.
Well, yeah.
And I imagine a lot of us here who work with computers may be faced with a similar problem.
Your lower cost alternative at this point would be to, actually there are now 486 systems, 486 motherboards that are Y2K compliant that I'm aware of, and that they can, you can easily swap them out of your case. You just take it someplace, tell them you want to upgrade to a newer system. Matter of fact, you can probably get a new Pentium level system for under $200 or $300 for the same cost that you would spend on buying a whole new PC. You can actually carry over your older technologies to the newer thing, although I recommend you upgrade the hard drive. But anything beyond that, that's about it. You can still use your computer monitor, providing it's not a monochrome display. It's more of the color display. And because I built a PC, and I've also had 1 year of high school programming, basic programming level language, basic programming. And so I'm a tad bit knowledgeable. Mr. Townsend does bring us some good points that we do as a community, as a whole. We do have to talk to our quote-unquote elected officials about this problem. And are they bringing enough contingency plans for this? I mean, they make us buy insurance in case of an accident. So why don't they use the hindsight that they have to look at this problem for what it is or could be and do something about it? And that's what I wanted to add in here. Even though Mr. Townsend is not technically knowledgeable on certain questions, which I understand, computers and understanding their operations, it took me about a month before I could finally break it down to a level where I'm at right now. I could understand and explain it to you in layman's terms. They're not an easy science to understand if you want to put that in perspective. But with patience and a little bit of education on your own, you could do something. Matter of fact, Jim, I'll even give you one of my tapes for free, so you can have a simple understanding of the binary code and stuff like that, and how it's all interrelated, how it's interconnected. Because basically what happens is when those double zeros pop up, that's a command in the binary code to stop a program from working. Not to end the program, I should say, but not delete it. Just stop it.
Okay, why don't we all retire down to John's there and we can bat some of these ideas around. And thank you all for coming, at least the residue of those of you that are still here. And remember our next meeting, 2 weeks from now, which is September the 2nd. Thank you very much, Jim. We'll see you all down there.